Serafina never expected to die that morning. As she reached for a glass of water, the darkness engulfed her completely. But death wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She watched her lifeless body from above, then felt herself drawn into an abyss surrounded by tormented whispers. Just as fear gripped her, a blinding light shone through the void. Jesus stood before her. What he said next about the future and the mark would alter everything. For most of my life I never imagined myself writing these words. My name is Serafina, and I used to live a life of quiet devotion, far from the chaos of the world. I had fully dedicated myself to God, taking my vows as a nun at a young age. My days were spent in prayer, service, and solitude, with the sole purpose of drawing closer to Christ. The world outside our convent moved quickly, but I was content with my mission to assist the poor, care for the sick, and intercede for those who had lost their way. I'd never questioned my purpose. I trusted that God would direct my steps, and that He had placed me precisely where I needed to be. My life was not filled with grandeur or recognition, but I did find peace in simplicity. Worries about the world, money, ambition, and power meant nothing to me. My sole concern was faith, but what happened to me altered everything. If someone had told me that one day I would die and return with an urgent message, I would have dismissed it. I had read accounts of near-death experiences, but they always seemed distant, as if the stories were intended for others rather than me. And yet, that cold morning I faced the unthinkable. It started with a weakness that I couldn't explain. For days I'd been exhausted, my limbs heavy and my breath short. I ignored it, thinking it was exhaustion from fasting and long hours of prayer. I'd led a disciplined life, frequently pushing my body to its limits in devotion to God. I believed He would support me as He always had. That morning I got up before dawn, as I had done every day for years. The rain tapped softly against my small window, leaving the air inside my room damp and cold. I reached for my Bible, but my hands trembled, and an odd numbness spread through them. I shook it off and stood, but my legs felt unsteady under me. Something wasn't right. I told myself I only needed water and a moment to regain my strength. However, as I reached for the glass on my bedside table, my vision blurred. The room tilted and my chest tightened as if a heavy weight was pressing down on me. Short gasps escaped my lips. The glass slipped from my grasp and shattered on the floor. Then the world around me started to fade. I tried to steady myself by gripping the edge of the wooden table, but my legs gave out beneath me. The last thing I recall was the cold floor against my body, the distant sound of footsteps rushing toward my door, and a muffled, urgent voice calling my name. Then nothing. Darkness. At that moment, my life as I knew it came to an end. However, my journey was only beginning. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't simply a lack of sound. There was an absence of everything. There was no pain, no breath, and no weight. Only stillness. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, trapped somewhere between sleep and waking. But when my senses returned, I realized the truth. I was no longer in my body. I imagined myself lying on the cold stone floor of my room. My robes were pulled around me. My skin appeared pale. My lips parted slightly, as if I had attempted to speak before falling. My chest didn't rise or fall. I was completely still. Then I overheard it. Elena, my neighbor, spoke in a frantic voice. "Oh dear Lord, please help me," she cried, her voice thick with panic. She stood in the doorway, her face pale with fear, and her hands trembling as she searched for her phone. I should have felt panic, urgency, or desperation to call out and let her know I was still there. But I did not. Instead, a strange detachment came over me. It was as if I were watching a scene from another person's life. I tried to move forward, but I didn't have any feet, legs, or hands to reach out with. Nonetheless, I was aware, more so than ever before. Then something unseen drew me. It was not a force I could resist. It wasn't hands gripping me, but rather an invisible current pulling at the very core of my being, drawing me upward. I rose effortlessly, weightless, as if gravity no longer affected me. My small room, the shattered glass on the floor, Elena's frantic cries, all faded beneath me. I passed through the ceiling as if it didn't exist, rising higher and higher into something vast and unknown. Then the world I knew vanished completely. Darkness surrounded me. It was not the darkness of a moonless night nor the soft dimness of a candle flickering out. This feeling was deeper, heavier and nearly alive. It pressed against me, vast and endless, far beyond my mind's comprehension. Initially there was silence. Then came the whispers. Initially they were distant, soft and almost mournful. But they became louder, multiplying and overlapping. The voices were filled with sorrow, regret, and even worse, despair. Some people cried out in pain. Others pleaded. Some were furious. I tried to turn to see where the voices were coming from, but I couldn't tell. I was suspended in the void. A soul without a body and a mind devoid of form. A terrible realization struck me. Was this hell? Was I being judged? I had dedicated my life to God in prayer and devotion. However, I had never been perfect. I had doubts. I had questioned. I'd failed. Was this why I was here? Was I condemned? The thoughts sent a wave of fear through me, and as if in response, the voices became more urgent. The darkness around me grew thicker, like a storm gathering its strength. I wanted to cry out, but I didn't have a mouth. I wanted to run, but didn't have any feet. Something moved from deep within the void. It was not a person. It was not even a shape. It was massive, overwhelming and suffocating. I felt it watching me, but I couldn't see anything. The whispers turned to wails. Terror gripped me. Dear God, please help me. Then I saw it. A light. It was faint at first, no bigger than a distant star, but it cut through the darkness with such force that the shadows recoiled. When I saw it, the voices faltered. The suffocating presence hesitated. The light began to expand, spreading warmth over me like a wave of golden fire. The darkness shrieked. Something broke within me, as if invisible chains had encircled me and were now tearing apart. The light drew closer, and I realized I wasn't alone. Something or someone was approaching me, and I realized what it was at that moment. I was being rescued. The light engulfed me, destroying the shadows that threatened to consume me. Warmth unlike anything I'd ever experienced washed over me, filling every aspect of my being. The somber whispers faded, replaced by a profound silence. Then I saw him. At first, he was just a distant figure standing in the center of the radiant glow. As he got closer, I felt an indescribable presence that was both strong and tender. His entire being exuded love, sorrow, and something else, urgency. Jesus. The moment I saw him, I knew. Every fiber of my being recognized him, not as a man, not as a teacher, but as the Alpha and Omega, the living God. His eyes, deep and piercing, carried the weight of eternity, but they were also filled with compassion as he looked at me. I fell to my knees not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't do anything else. In his presence, everything I'd known paled in comparison. My past, my prayers, and my sacrifices seemed insignificant in comparison to the vastness of his glory. I was unable to speak for what seemed like an eternity, but I didn't have to. He knew everything. He finally extended his hand. His voice was both gentle and unshakable, and it resonated deeply within me. You must see. The light in our surroundings shifted in response to his words. The warmth faded, and I was no longer standing before him. I was somewhere else. A vast and gleaming city stretched before me, complete with towering buildings, blinking lights, and people moving in eerie synchrony. Everything was organized, efficient, and controlled. I looked closer. At first, it appeared peaceful, but then I noticed the small details, the way the people walked, their expressions devoid of joy, and their movements mechanical. It was as if something vital had been taken from them. Then I noticed the mark, a small insignia, barely visible on either the right hand or the forehead. It was everywhere. On billboards, digital screens, and the glowing kiosks where people stand to enter buildings, buy food, or take public transportation. Nobody questioned it. Nobody resisted. The realization struck me like a wave of ice. The initiative was not just a political or economic program. This was something far deeper. The mark was not imposed on individuals. They accepted it willingly. They accepted it, and in doing so they sacrificed something valuable, something eternal. Jesus' voice echoed within me again, sorrowful but firm. They will be told they have no other option, but I will provide. The weight of his words hovered over me. The people in this vision chose the mark not out of malice, but because they were afraid of hunger, rejection, and losing their place in society. The scenery changed. Now I saw the other side. Those who had refused the mark. They weren't part of the gleaming cities. They were outcasts. I saw a mother standing in a market with her children by her side. She offered a handful of cash to buy bread, but the vendor shook his head and pointed to a scanner. She did not have a mark, so she had no right to buy. Tears welled in her eyes as she drew her children away, empty-handed. I witnessed a man in a hospital pleading for medication for his wife. The doctor shakes his head. No mark means no treatment. I witnessed entire families being evicted from their homes and forced into the streets because they refused to comply. And then I saw the hunters, who had been tasked with locating the unmarked and transporting them to re-education centers. They were not soldiers. They were neighbors, friends, and family members. The world had turned on them. Society labeled them as dangerous, radical, and anti-progressive. It wasn't just persecution. It represented a complete rejection of their right to exist. The vision shifted once more. I saw who had taken the mark. Initially, they appeared to be unchanged. But then I looked in their eyes. They were empty. Initially, it was subtle, a dullness and a lack of light. But over time, they became hollow. Their emotions faded. Their love for their families vanished. I saw a woman who had once held her infant child tenderly turn away, as if the baby were nothing. I witnessed a husband reject his wife, who had refused the mark, as if she were a stranger. They had given up something much greater than their freedom. They had surrendered their souls. The vision faded away, and I found myself standing before Jesus once more. My heart pounded. Tears burned my eyes. I wanted to beg him to undo it, stop it from happening, and change what I'd seen. But he only looked at me in sorrow. It's already begun. I opened my mouth in protest. But he did raise his hand. Tell them. His voice was thunderous yet full of love. Warn them. The time is short. I could barely talk. But how will they live without the mark? His gaze softened. The world will say they don't have a choice. But I'll provide. At that point I understood. The struggle was more than just a battle for survival. Your choice was a test, a final and eternal decision. The mark was more than just a tool for control. It was a spiritual submission. The vision started to fade. The light around him became blinding. I felt myself being drawn back to something familiar, painful, and human. I gasped and awoke. The vision didn't end. The image of the hollow-eyed masses faded, but another drew my attention. This time the world appeared different, darker, colder. The air felt heavier, thick with a quiet oppression. But this was not the city where Mark resided. This is where the unmarked had gone. I saw them. Men, women, and children who had rejected the mark. They were dispersed, wandering through desolate streets, huddled together in abandoned buildings, and hiding in forests and mountains where they couldn't be found. Their clothing was worn, and their faces were gaunt with hunger. However, they saw something the marked had lost. A light, a presence. I saw a man, once a respected doctor, digging through trash for food scraps. He'd been stripped of everything, his name removed from all records, and his credentials revoked. I saw a young woman who had formerly worked as a teacher, sitting outside a long-closed church. She held a small Bible, her fingers trembling as she read in the dim light of the moon. I saw an elderly couple, once surrounded by their children and grandchildren, now alone. Their family had turned them in, claiming they were dangerous for refusing the mark. The world had turned on them. Society had determined that they no longer deserved to exist. Initially, those who refused the mark attempted to remain in the cities, believing they could live quietly and unnoticed. However, the system did not allow for neutrality. People quickly recognized the unmarked individuals. Without the mark, they couldn't buy food, rent a house, or even get medical treatment. Banks closed down their accounts. Employers dismissed them. They became ghosts, driven out of society. Many fled. I noticed small groups forming in the wilderness, hidden communities of believers. They congregated in forests, mountains, and underground areas to avoid detection. They didn't have power, stores, or hospitals, but they did have faith. Then something extraordinary occurred. I watched as a man knelt by the dry, cracked earth, hands raised in prayer. His family stood behind him, their faces weary from hunger. They had not eaten for days. Lord, you fed Elijah in the wilderness. You fed the Israelites manna. You're the same God. As his voice trembled in the night air, something in the ground shifted. Plants sprouted before their eyes, with fruit-laden vines and deep, strong roots. Food appeared where none had previously existed. I saw another group hiding in a cave, huddled around a feverish child. They had no medication and no way to help. A woman laid her hands on the child's forehead, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jesus, you have healed the sick. You made the blind see. If we can't face the world, we'll turn to you. The child gasped at her words. His fever vanished instantly, but not everyone remained firm. Some hesitated. I saw a man, once confident in his faith, trembling as he held his starving daughter. How could I allow her to suffer? He whispered. Surely God would understand if I took the mark solely to feed her. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked at his wife, hoping she would agree. But she just shook her head. If we lose everything but our souls, we lose nothing. If we gain the world but lose our souls, we will have lost everything. The man turned away, wrestling with his decision. Some would hold on. Some would give in. And Jesus' words resonated in my soul. They will be told they have no other option, but I will provide. Then Jesus showed me one final thing. I noticed a woman standing in the ruins of a small town. She had once been wealthy, powerful, and a leader in her community. She now had nothing. She stood before a government official, who gave her one last chance. Take the mark and you'll have your life back. You will have access to food, shelter, and a home. You don't have to suffer any longer. She paused. Her hands trembled. She then shook her head, looking him in the eyes with quiet strength. My life isn't my own. And then I noticed the cost of her choice. She was taken away. But as they led her out of town, her face was radiant. I was certain that they had not abandoned her. She'd been chosen. The vision faded, and I was once again standing before Jesus. His eyes were filled with sorrow and hope. The vision shifted again, and I was drawn into the final scene. I stood in the heart of a sprawling city, but it no longer resembled the world I knew. Everything was clean, orderly, and efficient. Digital screens conveyed messages of unity, progress, and peace. The people moved in perfect sync. Their faces were expressionless, and their eyes were dark. It was the new world, one in which everyone had accepted their mark. At first glance, it appeared peaceful. There was no crime or conflict. However, as I looked closer, I realized that this peace had come at a terrible price. These individuals were no longer themselves. I watched as a mother walked past a small child huddled in an alley. The boy looked up at her, his face streaked with dirt, his hands extended. "Mama," he whispered. However, she did not stop. She didn't even recognize him. She'd taken the mark. Her love, her entire soul was gone. The scenery changed. I was in a remote outpost, away from the cities, where the unmarked had congregated. They were the last to remain, those who refused to submit. They lived in hiding, subsisting on scraps while waiting for what they knew was coming. And then the day came. I noticed the soldiers approaching, rows of them marching in perfect formation. Their faces were unreadable, and their weapons gleamed in the dim lighting. Behind them stood a man in a suit, calm and composed. "We don't mean to hurt you," he said, his voice smooth and almost gentle. "We want to help you. The world has moved forward. You don't have to suffer any longer." Nobody moved. Then came the last temptation. The man pointed to a group of frail, hungry children, their ribs visible under tattered clothing. "Think about your children," he said softly. "Is your pride worth their pain? Give them a future. Let them eat. Let them live." Some of the parents cried, their hands shaking. Some people stepped forward. A woman sobbed while holding a starving baby and whispered, "Forgive me." She took the mark. Her husband reached for her. But as soon as she accepted it, something changed inside her. She turned away from him, her eyes becoming cold. She no longer noticed him. She no longer cared. But there were some who refused. They stood together, exhausted but unshakable, their hands clasped in silent prayer. One man, his face gaunt with hunger, stepped forward, not to surrender but to speak. "You cannot take what belongs to God," he declared. "We've already made our choice." The man in the suit exhaled. "So be it." Soldiers raised their weapons. Then the sky split open. A light unlike any I'd ever seen poured down, brighter than the sun and life itself. The soldiers staggered and shielded their eyes. But the unmarked stood tall. Their faces brightened and their burdens lifted. Jesus had arrived. The vision shattered. A force stronger than anything I'd ever known drew me back, dragging me through layers of light and darkness. I felt like I was falling, tumbling through eternity, rushing back to something familiar and heavy. Then there was pain. A sharp gasp ripped through my lungs as air rushed in. My chest ached, my limbs felt weak, and my body, my frail human body, was mine once more. I was back. I heard a voice, urgent and desperate. Serafina. Oh, thank God. Stay with me. It was Elena. Her hands grabbed mine. Her face was streaked with tears. The room spun around me. My vision blurred, and my body shook from the effort of just existing again. I was still alive, but not as I once was. I understood why I had returned. To warn you, the world is changing. The decision is coming. And it's not just a matter of survival. It's a challenge of faith. I've seen what's coming. I've seen what happens to people who submit. But I've also seen people who stand firm. Jesus is coming soon. And when the time comes, there will be no middle ground, only one option. Will you stand firm or give up? Now is the time to make your decision.